and they want it all to be a conspiracy. There's been an amazing medical innovation in human culture, and that's vaccines.
I was concerned because he was starting to invite some pretty hard-hitting anti-vaccine types on his show.
What the hell is going on? Is what I asked myself after reading all of the online discourse this weekend and into today over podcaster Joe Rogan, Democratic primary candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and scientist Peter Hotez. So I'm going to break this down, and we're going to try to come to some kind of conclusion here over whether or not a scientist should debate a effing lunatic. So it all starts with this story in Vice. Actually, it really starts with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. going on Joe Rogan's show for a 3-hour conversation of madness. But this piece in Vice came out of it saying Spotify has stopped even sort of trying to stem Joe Rogan's vaccine misinformation. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a big anti-vax guy, going back even well before COVID, as a recent conversation between the podcast host and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. makes clear. And this is a piece by Anna Merlin. Now, just a quick summary here, since it is a 3-hour conversation. Joe Rogan, the biggest podcaster in the country, hosted a 3-hour conversation with RFK Jr., the anti-vax luminary turned presidential candidate. The conversation was an orgy of unchecked vaccine misinformation, some conspiracy mongering about 5G technology and Wi-Fi, which apparently melts your brain. Yes, he believes that. And of course, Rogan once again praising ivermectin, an ineffective faux COVID treatment. So there's a lot more, of course. There was conversations about vaccines and autism, even though this has been debunked countless times, in case you want information on that and are dealing with anybody in your life who believes this garbage. 2 studies have been cited by those claiming that MMR vaccine causes autism. Both studies are critically flawed, so I'll link to this below the video under sources. There's also a great piece here from Naomi Klein. This came out last week. Beware, we ignore Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s candidacy at our peril, where she goes on to completely debunk all his anti-vax garbage. And this line was the beginning of it, but there's many paragraphs on it. But she writes here, Kennedy is right that something changed in the world of autism at the start of the 90s. Just completely wrong about what? What changed was the medical definition of autism. So I don't want to go too deep on this because this isn't the part of the video. This isn't the point of the video. But essentially, they changed the definition of what autism was, meaning more people were included in that definition, which led to this massive spike in kids that have autism. So, and there's more to it as well. That's one aspect of it. But anyways, again, I'll link to that below. Also, on June 5th, on Jordan Peterson's show, the Democratic candidate, RFK Jr., told a controversial media commentator that he thought the sexual dysphoria, which he meant gender dysphoria. This guy is such a expert in these fields he espouses about that he doesn't even use the right terminology. The sexual dysphoria seen in children, particularly boys, was because they were swimming through a soup of toxic chemicals, blaming people that are trans on chemicals in the water. I can't show the clip. YouTube actually pulled the video down because it is such garbage. But he's saying it in this clip. I'll link to it below in case you want to see this garbage. But I like showing this chart because this helps to explain why there are more people who are coming out as trans than ever before. Because they are free to. Because there is less stigma within their social circles about it. So the history of left-handedness, rate of left-handedness among Americans, year of birth. Do you think, the chemicals in the water turned people left-handed in the 1940s and 50s? No, it's because it was no longer seen as some work of the devil. People were allowed to just be left-handed. We're seeing that now with people who are trans. This gets us to this. So, Professor Peter Hotez, who is an MD, I'll get to one of his amazing works in a second here. But he tweets out that Vice article saying Spotify has stopped even sort of trying to stem Joe Rogan's vaccine misinformation. It's really true, just awful. And from all the online attacks I'm receiving after this absurd podcast, it's clear many actually believe this nonsense. So before I get to Rogan's response and some clips that you may find enjoyable, this is Peter Hotez's work. So from his obscurity to a Nobel Prize nomination. Houston scientists acclaimed for their patent-free COVID-19 vaccine. I highlighted patent-free here because some people in the Joe Rogan circle, maybe even Rogan himself, are trying to claim that Hotez is pushing big pharma nonsense. Big pharma is anti-Peter Hotez. They're against people like this because he made the vaccine free for the world. Big pharma doesn't want that. Just to be clear about where Peter Hotez is on the big pharma spectrum, he worked within where he works, a university, to develop a patent-free vaccine where big pharma is not making money. Now, this gets us to Rogan's response, where he says, Peter, if you claim what RFK Jr. is saying is misinformation, I'm offering you $100,000 to the charity of your choice if you're willing to debate him on my show with no time limit. Peter responds, saying, I'm happy to come on and clear the air. I respect you and your show. I don't want an adversarial relationship. I think we can work well together. To which Rogan responds saying, to those misunderstanding what he's saying, he's not agreeing to debate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's just offering to come on my show himself. Yes, just like you had RFK Jr. on your show for 3 hours to talk bullshit. You won't have Peter Hotez on to refute that stuff by himself for 3 hours? Interesting. Now, Hotez has been on Rogan's show before, twice actually. So he discusses that here, Peter Dominic here, with a great discussion with Peter Hotez, and I'll link to his podcast below this video as well in case you want to listen to this entire discussion. But here is a clip where Hotez is discussing his recent interactions, or lack thereof, with Joe Rogan until recently.
He would have you on because you are a respected, credible voice, and I'm not sure how much he challenged you at that point, but after, when COVID began, and he started trafficking in some of these conspiracy theories and having doubts and all of that, you contacted Joe via email, via DM on Twitter. You guys had correspondence before, and he never replied to you. Is that correct?
Well, I was on twice on, I don't know if it was called the Joe Rogan Experience or what, but back when he was in LA before he moved it to Austin. And what's that?
Pre-COVID.
Well, once was pre-COVID, once was as COVID was getting underway. Okay. And he could be challenging, and I can't say it was totally smooth, but it was reasonable, and I thought it was a very good discussion. Again, how we're making vaccines, out of the pharma sector, doing this nonprofit, making vaccines for the world. And then afterwards, he came to Houston for his comedy show in the Toyota Center, and I went backstage with my youngest son, and we hung out, had a beer. It was fun, and I even thought of him as sort of a friend of sorts. And then when COVID really started getting bad, I wrote to him, emailed him several times in 2021, and then no response, and once more in 2022. One, to talk about our vaccines, and again, how we're bypassing the pharma sector. And also, I was concerned because he was starting to invite some pretty hard-hitting anti-vaccine types on his show, and as that Delta wave was starting to roll through the South, through the southern states and my state of Texas, you were seeing all these unvaccinated Texans and my neighbors losing their lives because they believed the anti-vaccine disinformation. And I wanted to come on and, tell people to get their vaccines. But at that time, he didn't respond.
So Joe Rogan is so committed to showing the reality, showing you the facts, the truth, that he ignored an actual anti-big pharma scientists that develop a patent-free vaccine. He ignored this guy, Peter Hotez, for 2 years after already having him on his show for a couple of times. So this isn't some like random person being like, hey, Joe, have me on your show. No, these guys know each other. He ignored him for 2 years during the height of Rogan's misinformation around COVID and vaccines. Yet now wants to have him on to debate a lunatic. So on that debate, here is Mehdi Hasan, and he just wrote a book on debating. This is his field. Like, he's an expert at debates. Here are his thoughts on whether or not Peter Hotez should debate Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
I literally wrote a book about the art and importance of debate. And yet I am telling you tonight that I am tired of the incessant debate me bro mantra from conspiracy nuts on social media. Because it is never a good idea for an award-winning, world-renowned, peer-reviewed vaccine scientist or an actual expert in any academic field to debate an unhinged crank who thinks Bill Gates wants to control us with microchips or that chemicals in the water are turning kids transgender. And yes, RFK Jr. has said both of those things. I mean, set aside for a moment that Joe Rogan wouldn't even be a neutral moderator of such a debate. He's endorsed anti-vax nonsense many times before. But you just can't, in general, debate with conspiracists and loons. You can't debate whether up is down, hot is cold, black is white. They never change their minds, and they win just by you agreeing to share a platform with them. What's the expression? Never wrestle with a pig, you both get dirty, and the pig gets 40,000 new followers on Twitter.
Now, I agree generally here with Mehdi Hasan. The one thing I would maybe disagree on is that RFK Jr. already has a platform and a following. I mean, he is John Kennedy's nephew. So this doesn't fall into the typical crank. This is someone who already is a celebrity. But the difference here being, or I should say the common thread being, debating these lunatics legitimizes both sides of the argument, pretends that there is an equal side to both when there isn't. One side has all the facts, all the data, the other side is just lying. And I'm going to get to more analysis of that in a bit here, but I do want to show you how this misinformation has worked to change Joe Rogan. I've shared this before. In fact, I did a video on this clip because it was so stunning. But back during the beginning of the pandemic, Joe Rogan was very pro-vaccine, to the point where they even mentioned in this clip Peter Hotez.
Yeah, so that's what we need to do today, is just say this is going to be challenging. And we're going to get through it, though. We are going to get through it.
I hope this wakes people up to the value of vaccines, too. There's so many wackos out there that think that vaccines are, a scam, or they're dangerous, or there's so many people out there that won't vaccinate their children.
I know, and that's one of your best shows you ever did was Peter Hotez.
Yes,
he's a dear friend of
guy.
mine. I do too. He's a dear friend of mine, as you. And he is one of the champions out there on this very issue.
Yes.
I couldn't agree with you more.
There is Joe Rogan 3 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, not only being pro-vaccine, calling those who don't vaccinate wackos, but also saying he loves Peter Hotez, the very guy that he will now not have on his show alone. This clip shows you the power of propaganda. Clearly, at some point, Rogan watched something or read something from some lunatic that then changed his mind, that he's now convinced of. And for anyone claiming, Rogan's pretending to be anti-vax or something, Rogan has a $100 million Spotify deal. He doesn't have to, it doesn't matter how many views or listens he gets. It doesn't matter how many headlines he makes. That money's there. His career is where it's going to be, where it is regardless. So he doesn't benefit by falling into this trash. No, I believe he truly, genuinely is now anti-vax after some idiot was platformed that he read or watched. Now, let me finish that clip since there's more goodness.
I think that's really an important point, that, we got to get this idea. These vaccines can be life-saving. If we had one right now, think how different this situation would be in we're in right now. Thank you for what you do say about vaccines, because people listen to you, and we need every positive voice, because we have so many crazy voices out there right now
So many people are paranoid and delusional, and they want it all to be a conspiracy. There's been an amazing medical innovation in human culture, and that's vaccines. It's amazing what it's done. And have there been adverse effects on people? Of course, everything that people do. There's some people that are going to react in a bad way. It doesn't mean it's not a positive thing.
It is just incredible to see the transformation. That Rogan is the perfect example of why you do not platform lunatics. And now Rogan himself is calling for a debate with a scientist and a lunatic. Few things to end on here. Just to give credit, because I didn't mention it earlier, Michael Osterholm is the other person in that Rogan clip that you just watched. And that was actually, I remember watching that episode because we were talking this at the beginning of the pandemic. Rogan has on his actual expert to discuss vaccines and what may happen, with COVID. And that was it was a very informative discussion. And since then, Rogan's show completely downhill. Now, some last things. So on the debate question here. So this is Dr. David Robert Grimes writing for anti-vaccine activists. Doesn't matter if they lose debate, they still win by virtue of getting false legitimacy and amplifying their message. Years ago, I made the mistake of debating vaccine crank Andrew Wakefield. Didn't matter that I showed his lies. He got the platform he craved. And Grimes has a larger article here discussing what he calls false balance. This is what I've criticized the media for doing for years. CNN, terrible at this. On the topic of climate change, for example, which he goes into this is largely focused on climate change in the BBC. But climate change for years was communicated as this debate between the climate science, or the facts, and people who don't believe the facts. Platforming the bullshit anti-climate change people as just as legitimate to believe as the actual climate science, which set us back, decades in terms of being able to actually do anything about this. So I'll link to his piece below. Last thing here, Peter Hotez has a book coming out on this very thing. So to understand how the anti-vaccine movement became a well-financed, organized, lethal force during the pandemic and its immediate aftermath, my latest book out soon, The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, A Scientist's Warning. So I will link to this below. It'd be nice if Peter Hotez gets to discuss his book on Rogan's show. Maybe. Rogan has surprised me at times. So maybe he'll change his mind and have Peter on again by himself to discuss this. But in terms of the debate, just the last thing on this. Debates are only effective if you are really good at debating. A scientist whose life's work is creating these patent-free vaccines, as the latest example here with Peter Hotez, he doesn't study, debate prep or how to debate day in, day out, like someone like Mehdi Hasan does. So that isn't his job. Meanwhile, you have a complete crank who, this is what he's done. He debates anti-vax garbage. You're not... The right side, the correct side of an argument, often does not win the debate. Because the winner of a debate is not dictated by the facts. It is dictated by performance. If you are better at performing, if you are more charismatic, if you are better at delivering your points, you are often viewed as the winner of a debate, even if you are wrong. So I wouldn't mind seeing somebody who is, skilled at debating, maybe do this debate, but still, then you get into the false equivalency, where you are legitimizing the incorrect, factually wrong side of the argument. But considering Rogan already had on RFK for 3 hours by himself, I'm not sure there's much more damage you could really do with that. So if there's someone out there who would be willing to debate RFK Jr., I think it could hold some value for that Rogan audience specifically.